Ding me.
Hey gamers, welcome to another Set It Up video. My Set It Up videos are where I take you through the setup of a board game and kind of go through the components. Today's game is Kingsburg. Kingsburg is a fantasy flight game. It's a 2 to 5 player game. It says it plays in about 90 minutes. Kingsburg is a dice rolling worker placement game. It does have some resource management and what I call light city building aspects to it. So if you like any of those things, then Kingsburg is probably going to be a game for you. I think Kingsburg is a really great game. I think this because it's good for new players. New players can step into Kingsburg. It's not too difficult to learn, so new players are going to adapt to this game pretty good. I think experienced gamers are going to like it because there's enough strategy and chance that it's going to keep experienced gamers' minds occupied as they play. Kingsburg is a game that takes place in a far-off land that's ruled by King Tritus, and King Tritus is appointing each player as a governor to newly acquired territories that he has acquired. As the governor of these newly acquired provinces, it's going to be your job to build these provinces up, and you'll be doing that by influencing the king's advisors and receiving help and aid from those advisors that will allow you to construct buildings, fight off encroaching armies that are going to be attacking you during the winter seasons of the years that you're going to play in Kingsburg. Kingsburg spans 5 years, and in the 5 years you'll be going through 8 phases for each of those years. So as you're constructing buildings and doing battle with armies that are trying to take over the lands, you're going to be gaining victory points, and the player at the end of the game with the most victory points will have pleased the king the most, because that will have meant that they've built their province up to the best of all the players, and that player then will be appointed as a new appointed advisor to the king's advisory board. So with that, let's jump into Kingsburg and see how it sets up. So you can see we already have the game kind of pre-set up here. I just set up the basic components. We'll set up the more complicated or more advanced things here as we kind of go walk through this. We'll start with the player components, and then we'll jump into the main game components. The main game components is where most of the action is going to take place. The game might look a little bit more complicated than it is. Most of the items on the game board are pretty much just like placeholders and markers, just so that you can kind of get an idea of the score, what year you're in, which phase of the game you're in, how many soldiers you have, that type of stuff. So it's not as complicated as it looks. I think this is a good game for newbies to jump into, and I think this is a good game for experienced gamers. There's enough strategy here and enough chance with dice rolling that it's going to keep everybody interested. Let's start with the player components, starting with your player tokens, and these are just your basic wood disc tokens. You get 3 of those, and you're going to place the first one on the zeros on the score track, 1 on the turn order chart, and then 1 on the soldier chart. And we'll get into those things here in a minute after we get through the player stuff, but for now let's just stick with the player things. Each player starts with 3 player dice. These are your workers that you're going to be placing. You'll roll those and hopefully get the roll that you want and throw that on the advisor that you want. But those you will be using for influencing advisors in some of the phases of the game. Each player also starts with a province sheet, and the province sheet has all the buildings that you can build during the production season. So this is the city building aspect of the game. It's kind of a light city building. It's not too complex. The province sheet, each player will get their own, so it's kind of nice that nobody has to share one. You don't have to crowd over here in the corner and all be looking at the one sheet. Everybody gets their own. They're all the same, so nobody has any special abilities or powers. Everybody gets a fair shake at trying to build their province, you know, the way they see best. On the sheet itself, you have spots that give you the cost of the building that you want to build, the victory points that you'll earn for building that building, and then some text that tells you the bonuses that you'll receive as you play through the game. You might receive, you know, increased defenses, more soldiers, wealth. You might have better chance of getting more resources as you influence certain advisors. So there's a little bit of strategy involved in how you want to construct the buildings that you want to construct. Players also start with their own building tokens. Those are just color matched to their dice and their player token, and you'll just use these to place on your province sheet, like so. It's almost like kind of like you're playing bingo, but these are for just marking the buildings that you build. Pretty simple, again, not too complex. And that kind of wraps up the player pieces, other than the 6 white dice that also come with the game, and those are just bonus dice. Players that might be lagging behind, that might get a bonus dice, or if you built a building that lets you have a bonus dice, you'll get to roll that as well. So those are just kind of set aside and used as needed. The first phase of the game even allows you to pick up a bonus dice if you're the player that's in last place when it comes to building buildings. The game has some mechanics in there that try to help pull the lagging players up a bit. So that's where that new player entryway into this game kind of is nice, because it does have things in the game that kind of helps players, kind of helps them along and keeps the race tight as you're moving through. Let's jump into the main game board area and kind of walk through that of what each element is on this board. Again, looks complicated, but it's actually pretty simple. The big area in the middle, these are the advisors. These are what you're going to be rolling your dice for to be placing on the advisor spots. They're numbered from 1 through 18. You have 3 dice, so you can obviously roll from 3 to 18, but you get to split the dice up and place them however you want as the turn rotates around the table. So for instance, if you want to roll for the king, you got to roll 3 6s. You can place all 3 dice on the king's advisor space, and then you would get a gold, a wood, a stone, and recruit 1 soldier. So the higher up you go with the advisors, the more goodies you're going to get. The lower advisors, it's kind of a little bit less items you're going to get, all the way down to the number 1 slot of the jester. He will grant you 1 victory point. Above the advisor area, we have the soldier chart, and that just simply tells you how many soldiers you've trained and how strong your military is going to be come the end of the year when you do battle with the enemies that are going to be jumping in and trying to wreak havoc within your province. To the right of that, we have the supply goods, and that's just simply a place to put your wood, gold, and stone. Those are some of the resources that you're going to be using to construct buildings, and then also that's kind of a currency to pay for soldier recruitment in one of the latter stages of the game. Down here we have the +2 tokens, and these are tokens that you can use to help boost the dice rolls that you have. So you can't quite get to that 18 to get that king advisor position. Well, maybe you roll a 16, but then also spend a +2 token, and that will give you your 18 and allow you to jump on that king position. I should mention though that the king is really not the best spot on the board. Really the queen is, so keep that in mind as you play. Down here on the bottom right, we have the year track. Pretty simple, just keeps the years known to the players. So it's 1 through 5. The game spans 5 years. So as you course through the game, you just move the year track up 1 year as you move through each phase or each year. Below that, there's a small number below that, and that just tells you what the strength of the encroaching armies are going to be when it comes time for the battle. So it's just like a little mini cheat sheet that lets all players know how strong do I need to make my military. Year 1, military strength somewhere in the 2 to 4 range is what the enemy strength is going to be, so you want to make sure your military strength at least matches that. The top left area, again below the soldier chart, we have the turn order chart, and that just lets all the players know the sequence of turns per player. You'll figure that out when you roll the dice in one of the productive seasons, and the lowest roll actually goes first, and then you would just stack up players going from lowest to highest. The last main area of the board is the calendar track, and this is the other spot where a lot of action takes place. These are where the 8 phases are kind of mapped out for each year. Each year has 8 phases, so you will use this to kind of advance the game along. Starting with phase 1, has that King's Aid, and that is where you would pick up one of those white die if you were the player with the least number of buildings. To start the game though, everybody has no buildings, so everybody's 0, so there is no player that's going to have the least buildings. So what happens there is all players will then just pick up of their choice. They'll pick up a supply from the supply good. So everybody kind of gets a little bit of a head start with resources. The main seasons to look out for are the season or phase 2, phase 4, and phase 6. Those are your productive seasons or productive phases. It's 8 phases in the game, but it's really not. It seems like that might take a while, but really you kind of buzz through them pretty quickly. The productive seasons are the seasons that are going to be where you spend the most time, but that's also where you have the most fun, because that's when you're going to be determining player turn, who goes first, and then that's when you're going to be influencing the advisors and trying to pick out which advisors you want to try to get to before other players do. And then you're going to receive your resources from those advisors, and then you get to build buildings. And that happens only in the phase 2, 4, and 6. That's your spring season, summer season, and fall season. The other phases in the game are really just quick kind of stops, just to either help players that are kind of lagging behind, but then also reward players that are kind of really doing well. So like the third phase of the game is the King's Reward. And the King's Reward says the player with the most buildings gets a bonus victory point. So it seems like a lot being 8, but it's really not bad. The 5th phase also contains the King's Envoy marker, which again is another one of those kind of let's help a player out that's needing some help. The player with the least number of buildings gets to pick up the King's Envoy token, and that token simply is used during the phase 2, 4, or 6. That will allow a player to influence an advisor that's already been influenced. So if somebody's already taken your spot and you're like, dang it, I want to get that spot. Well, if you have the King's Envoy, you can spend that and then also influence that same advisor. If you choose not to do that, then you can spend the King's Envoy token to build a second building during your turn. You're only allowed to build 1 building per turn, but having that and spending that will allow you to build 2 buildings. So kind of help you get back into that building race of having enough buildings as the other players. This season or phase 7 and phase 8, that's where you're going to will be preparing for battle. The winter season is your battle phase of the game, and that's when encroaching armies feel that you're the weakest, and that's when they're going to try to jump in and tear down what you've kind of built up. So to do that, you'll have an enemy deck that sits here on the game board. And what you'll do is the game comes with 5 sets of 5 cards, 1 for each year. You're going to shuffle each year separately, so you'll shuffle the year 5 cards and pick one randomly and place it at the bottom, face down on the game board. And then you're going to do the same thing for year 4, year 3, year 2, and year 1. And that will have built up the enemy deck, and this is what you'll use for the entirety of the game. You'll just set the other cards to the side, and you won't be using those anymore. So when you get to the battle phase 8, you'll flip over the top enemy card, and it'll reveal what the enemy is that's attacking you during this battle phase. And in this case, I flip over the zombie card. It has a strength of 4. That's the top left number. Shows you what the penalty is if you lose the battle. -2 victory points for this card. And what you win, the blue area of the card, is a +1 victory point. And you just basically compare the strength of the invading army with the number that you have on your soldier chart, which also coincides with that number that was under the year track of 2 to 4 to tell you the strength. So you kind of know that going into it. So there's kind of clues within the game to let you know how you should be playing. That kind of concludes the kind of basic setup and overview of the game. Hopefully this has given you a good look at Kingsburg. Like I said, this is a fun game. The components aren't really that high of quality. They're your basic game components, but that really doesn't detract from the gameplay. The gameplay is really fun, and it gets even more complex the more players you have. So if you're playing a 4 or 5 player game, there's a lot more interaction that's going to take place because you have that many more dice out on the advisor board taking spots that you might want. So advising or influencing advisors are really dependent on how you're rolling. So that's the nice chance element of the game, which I think gives the game a lot more fun and flavor versus just your standard worker placement where you just put you find a corner that you like on the board and you just keep hitting it, and that's where you keep going. You can't do that so much with this because you have to worry about what am I rolling? What's my dice showing up as? So, but then new players can get into pretty easily too, because like I said, it's really not that complicated. It's pretty simple. If you like the video, if you felt like it's very helpful, give us a thumbs up. Be sure to subscribe to the channel. We're going to be constantly making more videos. If there's something you'd like to see, or if there's any questions or comments you have, leave them in the comment box below. Thanks for watching, and keep on gaming.